Welcome back for another Naval History edition of the Proceedings podcast. We're coming to you today thanks to the support of Booz Allen. Booz Allen delivers outcomes with speed for the nation's most critical defense priorities, work with solution engineers who use AI, cyber, and quantum to help warfighters collaborate faster with allies and partners, from the open seas to the edge of space. Learn more at boozallen.com/defense. Well, hello again, folks. I'm Eric Mills, editor-in-chief of Naval History magazine. 110 years ago this April, the World War I struggle for Gallipoli was unfolding as Allied forces sought to take the strategically vital Dardanelles Strait, break open a supply line to Russia, knock Turkey out of the war, and take pressure off the Western Front. History, of course, recalls Gallipoli as a disaster for the Allies. It's perhaps most remembered for giving a black eye to the First Lord of the Admiralty, a fellow named Winston Churchill, the chief proponent of the idea, whose political fall from grace ensued. But as for our main interest here, the naval aspects of the Gallipoli campaign, Air Force Captain Grant T. Willis is back in the magazine to provide us with an insightful look at them in our cover story in our current issue. It's a heck of a piece, and I highly recommend it. As Captain Willis will point out, mine warfare, the importance of naval gunfire support, these elements are all part of the Gallipoli story. But foremost among the naval components was the submarine factor. And here to tell us all about the dynamics of that is Grant Willis. Grant, welcome back. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too, Eric. Thank you for having me back on. It's a pleasure.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to have you on. The first time we had you on here, you were Lieutenant Grant Willis, so congratulations,
Yeah,
Captain.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, this is a wonderful piece, and Gallipoli is something of abiding interest in the saga of World War I on many levels. It's from the way it's remembered in the memory, the common memory of the experience of that war, and folk music, and lessons learned, all these things. But the submarine factor is of particular interest to us. And as you point out very astutely in this article, there are applied lessons within the Gallipoli experience for today's current situation. So I'll let you tell the story.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. You mentioned those, what it's known for, the historiography behind Gallipoli and the Dardanelles campaign. And when I came across studying the Dardanelles, I was kind of looking for something different, something that's not normally known. It's normally known for the Anzac identity, Winston Churchill, right? Failed naval maneuver up the Narrows. And I noticed in a lot of the research, this little pesky submarine hanging around and creating havoc for the Allied fleet offshore. And then also the Allied submarines creating havoc inshore against the Ottomans in this battle. And I never really saw all of those aspects come together in one holistic piece to cover the effect that the submarine had during the campaign. So I wanted to do that, and that's where you got this piece. For the Gallipoli campaign, for those of you who aren't familiar, the First Lord of the Admiralty at the time, Winston Churchill, later known for his prime minister ship during World War II, World War I, he's in control. He's the political head of the Royal Navy. And by late 1914, the stalemate on the Western Front had basically nullified maneuver warfare. The trench system was enacted from the Channel Coast all the way through to the Swiss border, and the war of movement had ceased. So the way to get around that along the periphery, at least Winston Churchill thought, he could use the power and the might of the Royal Navy to try and circumvent Imperial Germany's advantage in that static warfare in the Western Front and try and take out low-hanging fruit is probably the best way to describe it in the mindset of the British War Cabinet at the time. Germany's ally, Turkey, or the Ottoman Empire, commonly known as the sick man of Europe in the decades leading up to that. And Winston Churchill decides that, the high seas fleet of Imperial Germany threatening the North Sea and the British Grand Fleet at Scapa Flow they're sitting there staring at each other like fleets in being, and waiting for that final showdown with the most modern level of equipment, the dreadnought. And Winston Churchill's idea is to take pre-dreadnought battleships. Now, these are classes of ships that are not to that modern level of dreadnought capability. They still are powerful pieces of weaponry, but they're not going to survive in that North Sea kind of engagement against the modern ships of the Kaiser's Navy. So they're going to take the pre-dreadnought battleship along with some French models as well down to the Mediterranean to try and force a very narrow gap in the Dardanelles Strait to go up to the Ottoman capital city, Constantinople, lay siege off of Constantinople with these big guns of these battleships that hopefully the goal is to have the Ottomans surrender, is basically the deal there. Open up a route to Russia for resupply and possibly, emphasize possibly, get the Balkan states to form some sort of coalition against Germany and take Germany from the back door through Ottoman Turkey. So really the idea is based off of a naval attack alone. And it's not just his idea. Lord Kitchener, the Secretary of State for War, a very famous guy in British military history, he is supportive of it. The British War Cabinet as well is supportive of it. And everybody needs to see themselves as doing something here because they need to avoid this long, grinding, non-moving trench warfare in the Western Front where they're taking thousands and thousands of casualties and they don't really have an answer for it. So this is a way to utilize the mobility and the power and the prestige of the Royal Navy to try and get after the peripheral strategy that we hear about a lot from academics and naval historians like Sir Julian Corbett, trying to go after more of a peripheral kind of strategy here to overcome the central power, which is Germany at the time. So February 19th, 1915, the first attack is launched. The Ottomans have a lot of coastal artillery batteries, coastal defense batteries along the narrows of the strait, the Dardanelles Strait there on the Gallipoli Peninsula. And they also have minefields as well. And that first attack really loses steam and fails. The Allied fleet withdraws, resets, and prepares for another attempt to force the Narrows on 18 March 1915. Now, in between 19 February and 18 March, there are a couple skirmishes. There are some duels between warships and forts. You have civilian trawlers, North Sea trawlers with civilian crews attempting to execute minesweeping operations for the first time. You can probably imagine how that went. And the Royal Marine Light Infantry, they land a couple companies to overwhelm some of the coastal defense batteries, but nothing really seems to be budging. And they organize a force of 18 ships to execute an operation on 18 March. And they execute that, and it's a complete failure. They lose 3 battleships. The French battleship Bouvet, there's a very famous scene painting of the Bouvet going down. It's actually the one of the main pieces of artwork that we use in the piece for Naval History magazine for this. And Bouvet sinks. HMS Irresistible, HMS Ocean also sink later on. And there's 3 Allied battleships at the bottom of the Dardanelles Strait by the end of this second attempt. Now, while all of this is going on, Lord Kitchener back in London as the Secretary of State for War, he's organizing a contingency to the failure of the naval attack. The whole idea of this naval operation is to use inexpensive warships, things that aren't going to cost you an arm and a leg if you lose it. It's not going to lose the war overnight. The pre-dreadnought battleship can still be useful, but if we lose a couple of them, it's okay. We can fall back. We can regroup, we can execute somewhere else, and we're not going to lose too many assets in doing so. Well, the British War Cabinet at the time, Lord Kitchener, saw the failure of the naval attacks to try and penetrate the straits up to Constantinople as a ding on British prestige. This possibly could have repercussions for the rest of the colonial empire, India, the rest of the Middle East. The view of the British subjects to the Royal Navy's prestige could take a hit, and they have to regain some sort of sense of honor here. So Lord Kitchener decides to organize a Mediterranean expeditionary force of several divisions and they're going to execute a landing on the Gallipoli Peninsula to clear the guns and clear any sort of mine-laying activity from landside, so that the fleet can then again sail up the straits and then lay off Constantinople and bring the Ottoman government to its knees and end the war for the Ottoman Empire. That all looks good on paper, but we'll see later on this isn't as easy as it sounds. So April 25th, 1915, actually a couple weeks after the failed attempt to force the Straits, the Mediterranean Expeditionary Force under General Sir Ian Hamilton lands on the Gallipoli Peninsula. He's got several divisions here. Just to list off the order of battle here, you've got the 1st Australian Division, the Australian and New Zealand Division, the British Regular 29th Division, the Royal Naval Division, and then the French Orient Expeditionary Corps, which is a couple brigades strength, roughly a division. So these forces are going to land all across the Gallipoli Peninsula, as well as the Anatolia side for the French, and a couple French units as well with the British regulars. And they're going to hit the southern tip of the Gallipoli Peninsula, as well as the Australian New Zealand Army Corps. The Anzacs are going to hit on the western Aegean side of the Gallipoli Peninsula. Now, these landings are poorly planned. The terrain on the Gallipoli Peninsula is rocky. It's rocky. It's difficult to dig in. It's difficult to maneuver. The Allies didn't have very good intelligence on the terrain analysis there. That's why beach analysis and amphibious operations is very important. They didn't have specialized landing craft. They had very, very little time to plan this and execute it. And as you could probably imagine in 1915 standards, they don't have radios. They don't have any secure communications. They don't have any secure logistics. And they also don't bring any floating reserves. So whatever hits the beach, hits the beach. And they often land at the wrong location, and they have to figure it out real time. The Ottomans, on the other hand, they've had a couple weeks to prepare. They dig in, and they offer some pretty stiff resistance. Now, the purpose of this side of the podcast isn't to go into the land campaign, but to understand how the undersea domain really does affect the outcome of the campaign as a whole. We have to understand that the Allies are stuck on the beaches. They don't really get to drive inland. There's no reserve component that's going to reinforce immediately the beachhead to break out of the beachhead after the initial assault units land. And they're really just stuck within eyeshot of the shoreline, and they have to dig in right there in place. And the lines are static, just like they are on the Western Front. And except in this case, these are not luxurious, if you can use that word, trenches where it's like trench city, where you've got, many cities and towns out of these trench lines. You've got literally shantytown visions of, whatever you can dig in place into rock. And, these are horrific conditions, and there's no really way to evacuate wounded outside of any sort of combat area, because you're so close to the beachhead that the Ottomans are able to shell the beach. All of your supply, all of your medical, all of your rear echelon is within earshot of the frontline trenches right there on the beach. And the only way to get people out is to disembark and go back to the water-based hospital ships, and then evacuate from there to Alexandria or Greece. So you've got a lot of problems as the Allies, right? But as we will see in the execution of the campaign, the Ottomans have a problem as well. It's very difficult to assault these prepared defensive positions in the Allies. It's very difficult to drive them off into the sea, because they have this huge fleet off of the coast where they can bring mobile gunfire platforms in the form of naval artillery to any sort of defense that the Ottomans, in face of the Ottomans' attacks. So the Allies are dug in with their own machine guns. They've got battleships on call, fire support there. They've got cruisers, destroyers capable of firing onto the beachhead and defending the Allied positions. And then in the Ottoman case, you've got a long stretch of supply lines that have to come across land and sea that are being interdicted by Allied submarines. So Allied submarines are penetrating the Dardanelles Strait. They are getting into the Sea of Marmara north of the Dardanelles Narrows, and they're sinking Ottoman shipping as it's trying to reinforce the beachhead, and it forces the Ottomans to stop doing that and execute a long line of communication, line of supply up the Gallipoli Peninsula back to Ottoman mainland control, because there's a very narrow strip that's supplying the front line. So you've got a logistical problem on the Allied side. You got a logistical problem on the Ottoman side. And the British actually win a couple Victoria Crosses for their submariners in these operations. And some of the first ever submariners to win the Victoria Cross are here in 1915 in the Sea of Marmara and the Dardanelles Narrows. So that's a key function here that I don't want to have the U-boats overshadow, if I can say that. But later on in the campaign, you start to see British intelligence figure out pretty quickly that the U-boats are going to show up. The German Navy is going to send a couple U-boats out there to the Eastern Mediterranean and the Aegean to try and support this operation. And the Germans are actually taking command of the Turkish Fifth Army. A guy by the name of General Lehman von Sanders is put in charge of the defense of Gallipoli. And he recognizes the importance of using submarines in conjunction with the counter-amphibious assault from landside against the Allies. So he's going to try and put together counterattacks with the Ottoman units that he has at his disposal on the Gallipoli Peninsula, along with German U-boats that can try and do a 1-2 punch here. So really, his idea is to draw in the Allies' attention to the ground assault, and knowing that the naval gunfire is going to be very important to fending off any Ottoman assault, he's going to use the U-boats to basically distract the Allied fleet to make sure that it cannot concentrate on providing that key naval gunfire, and in fact, it's trying to save itself because these U-boats are running around. Well, that doesn't really materialize. He's not really able to organize that kind of counteroffensive, and the Turkish units that try to execute a frontal assault do get smashed. But the U-boats still arrive, and this is where we're getting to our main point here of this whole thing. U-21 is just one German U-boat that shows up in the midst of this whole Allied fleet. And U-21 is commanded by a guy named Captain Lieutenant Otto Herzing. And he's going to get in there off of the coast of Gallipoli, and he's going to sink a couple battleships. March 25th, U-21 pops its periscope up, and he actually executes a assault against HMS Triumph, puts 2 torpedoes into her. HMS Triumph goes down, and everybody spotted U-21's periscope. People returned fire. They couldn't hit him. And he ends up point blank shooting a couple torpedoes in the side of that British pre-dreadnought battleship, sinking her and RTBing out of the area, resetting a couple days later, 27 March, he shows back up and hits HMS Majestic in almost the same way. He actually gets through a couple torpedo nets that they had laid around the side of the battleships to try and mitigate that threat, and he point blank shoots another couple torpedoes at HMS Majestic. HMS Majestic explodes, goes down, and now you've got 2 pre-dreadnought battleships sunk. Now, on top of all of this, just 12 days prior to U-21's first sinking of HMS Triumph, a Turkish torpedo boat destroyer comes in the middle of the night and finds HMS Goliath, another pre-dreadnought battleship. And they execute a run, and there's signal lights flashing to try and identify the Turkish torpedo boat destroyer. Normal, just code like, hey, here's me, who are you? And the Turks respond with a couple torpedoes and put it right into the side of HMS Goliath. HMS Goliath explodes and goes down. And after that, you've got 3 British battleships on the bottom right off of the beachhead. So if you're the Joint Force Maritime Component Commander and you've just lost 3 of your capital ships inside 2 weeks, I'd have a real issue with that as far as how long can I sustain this level of attrition. Not to mention other U-boats are sinking 18 Allied transports throughout the campaign as they make their run to resupply the beachhead from British-controlled Egypt. So you've got real problems here on the maritime side that often get overshadowed by the battles going on the peninsula. So you got battles going on like Lone Pine, the Neck, Achibaba, battles going on at Cape Helles, landings at Suvla Bay, all of that stuff, we normally talk about, but we don't talk about the effect that this single U-boat had in the strategic outcome of the campaign, because once these 3 British battleships are sent to the bottom, and U-21 has done its job, done its stuff, the British Royal Navy, they place £100,000 reward on Otto Hersing's head, dead or alive, £100,000. And Otto Hersing gets a call sign from his action. He's called the Destroyer of Battleships by the Germans. He's made a hero. He wins the Pour le Mérite. A lot of us might know that as the Blue Max. That's the highest award that Imperial Germany can bestow. There's actually a really good movie made early 70s, late 60s about that, I think. But the Blue Max is awarded to him, and he's made famous. He's wanted by the British, and the British end up pulling their fleet out of the immediate vicinity of the beachhead to the Greek island of Lemnos. Now, what that means now is that the fleet has to sortie to execute any sort of defensive fire, any sort of preemptive bombardment for any sort of frontal Allied assault. All of that has to be choreographed and organized now. Beforehand, it was just sitting there off the coast, and you can call on it within earshot, within eye shot, lamp, signal, whatever, or flag signaling, whatever you needed to do. The fleet was right there, and that morale boost to the troops ashore was huge. Once that was taken away, you start to notice in the article we talk about several individuals who speak about some contempt for the Navy when it leaves its position and goes over to the island of Lemnos out of eyeshot, because now you've lost your main naval gunfire platform. And the Turks obviously have a boost in morale. They see this massive British fleet retreat. That's a huge boost for them. And the Allies lose all their fire support. It's very difficult to bring field artillery pieces onto that kind of terrain, that rocky, mountainous, cliff-side terrain that Gallipoli can offer. So you don't have very many artillery pieces that are getting on shore. You have to rely on the gunfire support. So, all of this to say, this one submarine, to me, studying this campaign, that one submarine made such a strategic impact overall. And you have people like, people from the level of Julian Corbett being the highest, British naval historian of the time, writing about the impact that this single submarine had. Never before, just paraphrasing him here, never before have such strategic outcomes been influenced by means so small. And from his perspective down to the level of a regular trooper in the Royal Naval Division, Joseph Murray, saying, "Hey, this is a big impact for us on the ground in the trenches, because we can look behind us and we don't have this force to protect us anymore. This layer of confidence is now gone," and that's a huge thing. And when you think about the other piece in this article that we mention, our friend Chester Nimitz shows up in 1912 with an article in Proceedings talking about the effect that a coastal submarine can have in the coastal defense. And he writes in 1912 about the fact that, any sort of amphibious force trying to project power ashore, if it has to deal with coastal submarines, it's going to have a problem. And he writes that in 1912. And now here we are in 1915, a couple years later. And I couldn't find anything on whether or not, General Lehman von Sanders or anybody had read Lieutenant Chester Nimitz's perspective and Proceedings in 1912. But I like to think that they might have.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's really the over-encompassing story here. We all know that eventually the British evacuation of Gallipoli was actually more well-organized and well-executed than the actual landing and the campaign execution itself. But they do end up disembarking the Mediterranean Expeditionary Force. They retreat from the peninsula, and it's known as a Ottoman victory, and it creates names like Ataturk and the modern idea of Turkey, and it creates these mythological ideas of nationality for Turkey and Australia. The idea of the Anzac is born from this campaign, but it all goes back down to these little tiny tidbits of tactical successes that lead to strategic effect. This one submarine made a huge impact, and I just never seen any sort of collection of material on that, and I really just wanted to bring that forward. But
Yeah, no, it's the psychological. The takeaway from this is the psychological impact in combat and how that can really alter the calculus and the momentum of what's going on. It's almost hard to quantify how profound that was. And as you say, it was a double-edged thing. It utterly sank the morale of the British troops, no pun intended, and it clearly cheered the hearts of the Turks. Um, it's hard to put a capper on how important that is. And the commanders are weighing the attrition factor and all that, but what about if they had stuck it out? They would have lost a few more pre-dreadnoughts, some more men, and all that. But it's hard. We'll never know. But it's one of those what ifs. What if they'd stuck it out and not pulled the fleet back to Lemnos? But I think also, as hearing you recount this, and it sort of dawned on me vaguely when working on the story, is that this is a crowning early example how submarine warfare has arrived. It's been something that's kind of been people have been tap dancing around it. It's been kind of emerging, but this is its coming out party. I mean, it shuts down a campaign. One submarine has this profound impact. And let's give a mention to the Anzacs you've alluded to here. This looms large in the Australian and New Zealand national memories. Americans might not quite grasp the extent of that. When the film Gallipoli came out in Australia in 1979, kind of a classic war film, really. Profound, unforgettable closing freeze frame in that movie. It's just tragic. That created a wave of nationalism in Australia when that movie came out. It just dredged up all of these feelings and whatnot. Lord, the most poignant, tragic song to come out of World War I, the band played Waltzing Matilda, alludes to the Anzac experience at Gallipoli.
Yep.
So very much there's a human dynamic to this that should be remembered when talking about the strategic ramifications. Well, before we go on to some modern relevances to all this, let's play 110-year-old Tuesday morning quarterback for a second and think, what could they have done to get to Constantinople? What could they have done differently? My first one would be maybe they should have kept the fleet there and toughed it out for another 10 days or so and see if something could start moving, something could start happening. What do you think? What if the Allied submarines are a game changer early on? And as you say, that gets overshadowed by the U-boat factor when they come in. They managed to get all the way through. No one else did, but the Allied submarines did. What if they had gone all the way, gone to Constantinople and wreaked havoc there?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? Winston Churchill has a couple thoughts on this, but
I bet he did.
Yeah. Just for me though, people criticize the Royal Navy's leadership in this. I think Winston Churchill describes the attack without vigor. If they had pressed forward to Constantinople, if the fleet had sat there, shelled the city, it's very difficult to determine what, right? Because you're not getting through that Bosphorus Strait to get into the Black Sea. The Russian Black Sea fleet isn't going to meet you halfway. Without really a land component to execute any sort of control over anything strategic like the Gallipoli Peninsula, you're not going to get anybody in Constantinople to really throw in the towel here. And on top of that, but play devil's advocate here, the British submarines do create some civil unrest in Constantinople. They're sinking ships right off the shore. They're sinking the British submarines and Australian submarines, I might like to add, are sinking Turkish pre-dreadnought battleships, Turkish transports. They sunk a transport with 6,000 guys on it and sent it to the bottom. That's huge for some sort of civilian impact. Now, if they had sustained that, I don't know if that would have had really an impact in Constantinople the way that we would, think maybe the War Cabinet in London might have wanted. But regardless, landing a force at Gallipoli, the location that they landed at is where I have an issue now. Because looking back at people like Lehman von Sanders who had to defend the peninsula. He says on record, hey, why didn't they land to the north? Why didn't they land to the north in mass and execute a operation to cut at the narrow point, the peninsula up north, instead of landing from the very bottom? That's weird, especially with no terrain analysis, right? And the other factor for me is if your objective is to clear the guns, to clear the coastal batteries, and you're attempting to move this fleet north. They were doing something in the beginning of this campaign, landing Royal Marine Light Infantry companies in small unit actions to take out these fortifications as they moved up. And they stopped doing that. They did them. There were a lot of heroic actions there. They were partially successful, but there was no real follow through on that. And I think if somebody had mentioned, hey, maybe a little bit more planning, a little bit more deliberate, execution of maybe building some dedicated landing craft, a dedicated landing plan, concentrating these, 4 divisions in the initial wave, not across, 4 different landing sites, but concentrating on one and really breaking out from that with reserves up north and trying to execute some sort of better terrain analysis and better initiative. I think you could have seen a little bit more success, but it's really difficult to speculate on whether or not the fleet itself would have really done anything to change the Ottomans' mind. There's no way of knowing that. But yeah.
No, of course there's not. It's always just food for thought. But here's another one dawns on me as we talk. Where's the Black Sea Fleet and all this? What if there had been a coordinated effort on their part with the Allied fleet coming from below, and they're kind of both hitting them in different directions? I mean,
yeah,
you never think about that. They just sort of the passive thing. That's sort of the target to get to. Why aren't they pushing this way while the other allies are pushing this way?
Yeah, combined Allied offensive sure would be nice, wouldn't it? Yeah, and that's part of the learning process I think that we take away from World War I going into World War II. Having that combined general staff kind of mindset where we're working with the Allies to execute real-time operations as a combined and joint entity. They didn't really have that in World War I. They're still learning, different styles of warfare. And I think if they were able to get the Russian Black Sea Fleet to come south, there certainly would be a diversion of limited Ottoman naval assets to try and stop that. And that might have done something. But it really was a political move to use the fleet to exercise some level of fear in the Ottoman capital. And we'll never know if they would have capitulated or not. We know the people did riot for a submarine. We knew that. So that's something to kind of hang on to there with that mindset. Maybe there is a dimension of reality to the execution of a maritime strategy against the enemy capital. Maybe there is something there where the people would get fed up with the leaders in charge in the capital city if they had Allied fleets, a massive Allied fleet right off their coast. We know what it did to the morale of the troops in the trenches on the Gallipoli Peninsula. What would it do to the civilian population? We'll never know. But that is interesting to come down with the Russian Black Sea Fleet and then have the Mediterranean Allied fleet come up and meet just off of both sides of the capital and have that kind of like, oh, you're surrounded kind of mentality.
You're doubling their trouble,
Yeah.
That's always good. Well, the aspect of how one humble U-boat brought the Allied fleet, kind of sent it packing. It really kind of did, and completely crushed the any kind of psychological edge that the attackers could have had. This is very relevant to the current geopolitical situation, is it not? Why don't you talk about that some?
So, all of the basis of this article and really the study of the Dardanelles campaign from a subsurface side really kind of stemmed from I read a Red Storm Rising when I was a kid, 1986, Tom Clancy, and there's a chapter in that book that's very interesting to me, and I think it gets overlooked. Operation Doolittle is a chapter there where a couple submarines, some Los Angeles class submarines in this fictitious World War III with the Soviet Union gone hot kind of deal, and they take a couple Los Angeles class submarines with Tomahawk cruise missiles, and they ambush Soviet long-range naval aviation assets that were targeting the carriers in the fictitious third Battle of the Atlantic. And they timed it up where these Tomahawk missiles are going to get launched from the subsurface against all 6 major naval air bases in Murmansk. And when the Badger and Backfire bombers are coming back from their sortie low on gas, they can't divert, and the Tomahawks line up with proper intelligence to hit the air bases right when the Soviet bombers land. And that got me thinking about, the effect that a submarine can have. And that's in the 80s. And then looking back at 1915 at the singular submarine, what kind of impact can it have to the overall strategic situation? And I, kind of tied that into, in the Western Pacific today, what can the subsurface domain provide at the tactical level that results in a strategic shift like that? And sure enough, the Department of Defense released, they release every year a congressional study that they present to Congress at the unclassed level about the capabilities of the PRC. Okay, and I saw that, and I looked at their undersea domain capabilities that they were, presenting to Congress, and they're showing a very growing People's Liberation Army Navy submarine force with increasing capability. Now, you get one of those submarines with an increased land attack cruise missile capability, as stated in the DoD report, with a clandestine land attack option. And I thought, as an Air Force guy, this is just me personally as an Air Force guy, I worry about that, right? Because I think about, the power of the aircraft in the sky launching its weapon systems is that's a very potent force. It's a very difficult thing to try and combat. But when it's on the ground, like a B-52 on the ground, that's just a static display. And if it gets hit on the ground, it's useless. And a single submarine with land attack cruise missile capability, or capability in the Western Pacific to be translated into the second, third island chain, even the homeland, that can have strategic implications on the ability to respond. And that, just me personally, not doing any sort of speculation here, but that worried me a little bit, right? And then worrying about our own capability to get our submarines where they need to go to execute the kind of targets they need to prosecute, right? So I think you guys did a really good series on the War of 2026. Yeah, that was really good. I love that. Actually, we were up in Chicago watching my wife graduate her master's program while I was reading that about submarines. She's probably going to get mad if she hears that. But yeah, I was reading Bill Tody's.
Nice plug for proceedings.
Yeah. I was reading that.
You're at a wedding, and it's like, oh, I got to read this.
Yeah, and I think Bill Tody came out with a great article on the power of the submarine in the Western Pacific, and it got me thinking. If our submarines are forced to shadow, a couple of submarines, and our ASW forces are forced to try and execute their main goal in the rear areas to try and get these guys that are running around with, this kind of capability that the DoD is releasing to Congress. Well, our guys aren't going to be able to concentrate on the main center of gravity. And I think we pointed out in the article here, amphibious shipping. The enemy red team amphibious shipping is the main center of gravity. Now, if you've got submarines running around taking out long-range Air Force precision fires that are supposed to support that, also running around targeting the carriers, running around targeting the logistic hubs and island bases and stuff like that, holding those at bay in the rear areas, what kind of effect is that going to have forward? Right? And then you have these, American submarines, Virginias out there doing what they need to do and taking out enemy shipping. Well, those are going to be our primary assets out there if that's the case, right? So it just gets you thinking that as a joint mentality, as an Air Force guy, Navy, Marine Corps, the Army, trying to make sure that we enable our conventional forces, especially the subsurface force, to go out and execute its main objective: sinking enemy shipping, getting rounds on target, maintaining survivability, and getting mass to that location to influence that center of gravity. Because we all know what one submarine can do. If we can get multiple submarines to execute that and then protect our own capability to enable that fight, that's where that's where I think we're going to make our money. And and that's just a personal view on that. But writing this article, it really got me thinking about the prospect of it's not just about whether or not air power can execute what air power needs to do. It's about what can air power enable the rest of the joint force fires be able to execute. So, but that's really my take on that. That stems from our earlier discussion a couple of years ago on the Falkland Islands, and that one submarine was able to execute, how that impacted the rest of the campaign. And I feel like the Falklands is a great case study for joint force professionals to try and unpack the kind of lessons that we're going to need to go into the next fight. But go back to World War I, go back to 1915, even go back to Chester Nimitz in 1912, and he'll tell you the power of the coastal defense and the fact that a fort isn't just a coastal defense battery. It's missiles, it's submarines, it's aircraft. And in the Western Pacific, we have a series of forts ourselves. It's not just us attacking a fortress at the mainland of Asia. It's them attacking a series of fortifications that we can put up. So it's a two-way.
Right. Yeah, it is. And history has the lessons that add clarity to what we face today. I can't think of a more potent example of that than what you've pointed out in this article. And it's a wonderful way to commemorate Gallipoli. And it's also a very astute way to look at the important lessons to be derived therefrom. And Grant, you've done another great job of sussing out those lessons. And I hope you'll continue in your efforts with this, because you're definitely an up-and-comer with this sort of thing. And we look forward to seeing more from you in the magazine, even though you're Air Force. We don't hold that against you.
I appreciate that.
You're a genius, and to know your stuff, that overrides it completely. Also, thank you for what you're doing. Seriously about that. Yeah. Well, listen, it's great to have you on again, Grant. It's always a pleasure, and I look forward to doing it again with you sometime. And thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely, Eric. Thank you again for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
So do we. It's been fascinating. Well, that's it for today, folks. But I should remind you before we part company to join us in Annapolis on Wednesday, May 14th for the important and timely discussion at our annual meeting. This year, the theme will be Correcting Course, Revitalizing the Shipbuilding Industry to Meet Strategic Demands. That is a topic of great importance and in the news right now, and in the pages of proceedings as well. So please think about showing up for annual meeting, hopefully in person here at our beautiful Jack C. Taylor Conference Center, or virtually. You can attend that way too. And it's just as profound and fun a thing to be part of. So visit usni.org events to register and to get more information on this. So until next time, folks, keep reading, keep curious, keep the torch of history lit. So long.